Welcome back to another episode of Movies in Black and White. My name is Raf, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Jacob Holmes. Jacob, how are we doing today?
Doing pretty good. It's a nice day to sit outside.
Yeah, we're for anyone who's not watching on YouTube and maybe only listening to us, Jacob is repping Alabama, got the Bama beanie on, and I'm repping the Cuse. So college sports are definitely being repped here. But we're not here to talk about college sports today. We're going to be talking about Copaganda movies, which is a very fun, interesting topic that we're going to dive into. And we're going to be looking at a couple movies in particular, mostly BlacKklansman and Training Day, and sort of like trying to understand where those movies specifically fit into propaganda, sort of like storytelling as a whole, and obviously like the relationship between policing in this country and black communities, because there's been a long storied history of police not treating black folks the best. And by not treating black folks the best, I mean being actively abusive, actively harassing us, actively being antagonistic towards us, to the point where we've seen time and time again young black people dying at the hands of police officers, which is a extremely frustrating thing to live through and experience time and time again. So we're going to be talking about how these movies kind of, feed into a system that like allows cops to continue to do that. So we're going to get to those movies, but I wanted to start with a few other questions just so we have like some background about propaganda in general. I think it's a term that like most people are familiar with, but it's like basically this idea that through media, cops and the police in general sort of get to whitewash all of the negative things about the work that they do and put a positive spin on like the entire system of policing, which I'll be frank, I don't think is like a system or an institution that is deserving of a like glowing kind of depiction within media. um but in order to start, I think like before we get to movies, there are like other areas where propaganda is maybe a bit more prevalent, and I think it really starts with like news media. So, Jacob, for you, you're a journalist by trade. Uh, you write for your local newspaper. What are your thoughts generally about like the press's role in spreading and reinforcing propaganda, like historically?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of that. I mean, we would always do so. Now I'm a political reporter. So for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been reporting politics, and so now I'm actually kind of more on the other side of that, if anything. Not that we
Hmm.
don't run nice stories sometimes about, like state trooper class graduating or something like that, or we obviously we talk about budgets for sometimes for the police for the state troopers. Um, and then there's like legislation. We're always dealing with legislation. Like just recently in the last session, there was a bill to give cops more immunity, which like they already have so much immunity, and it's basically impossible. It's basically impossible to hold a cop accountable already, and this just adds like another layer to that process. And it did pass, unfortunately. Um, but we were fighting to try and tell people, you know, why do cops need more immunity? Like, here's the cases that we've dealt with, and we kind of shine a light on the instances of bad police behavior. But when I was at the local community newspaper, one of the things we did every year was like we had like officers of the year, um, and like we would like tell their stories. And I remember one of the officers of the year when I was at the Detroit Messenger um, was a guy named. Hold on, let me pull up his name because I'm going to talk about him. I can name him. Um, it's been a while. Brandon Hicks. Okay, his name is Brandon Hicks, and so Brandon Hicks was one of two officers that was featured as picked by the department as like police of the year. I think because in part of like a situation where they came across an unconscious woman and like helped provide CPR until medical people get there. Obviously, a good thing, like a good thing.
Mhm.
Um, but Brandon Hicks would later become a different story. You may not be aware of Ulysses Wilkerson the third, um, a 17-year-old
I'm not.
black boy that was beat by police officers, specifically Brandon Hicks, in 2017 in Troy. Um, he was supposedly loitering around the back of some downtown businesses late at night, and the officers tried to make contact with him, and he ran. They said that he had a gun in his waistband. Maybe it fell out. Maybe it didn't. Um, and I mean, just
Perhaps it
had
was never there.
right. And so, and then there was, I mean, his whole orbital socket was just like super swollen. And there was a picture of that. Actually, so Al Sharpton's half brother, supposedly, Kenneth Glasgow, lives near the area, and he was around for speaking for the family, demanding answers. And the local NAACP, it was a big turmoil. Black Lives Matter had come in, and I got to really see like all sides of everything. One of the big
Mhm.
deals, obviously, was we need to release the body cam footage, and the police were saying it's an investigation and yada yada. We can't do that. And I remember having people from both sides coming up to me, um, like they knew the situation, right? Like even though we hadn't seen for sure whether there was uh, an unjustified use of force, the NAACP folks were like, you know, dead set on it was definitely out of line. Um, and there's reasons for that. I mean, there's reasons to believe it was out of line. Obviously, there's a rich history of police acting out of line when it comes to black youth. I don't want to act like the
Mhm.
NAACP didn't have a good reason to believe that. But then I was also at a Pike County Republican women's meeting, and one of the very very old white lady, um, who would always come up to me, she was like, "Well, I just think the police was just doing his job, just trying to do his job or whatever." And I'm like, you don't know
Mhm.
what happened either. Like, no one knows what happened. We have two sides of the story, and we don't have the truth. And it just goes to show. I mean, that's how it is. But yeah, Brandon Hicks apparently, you know, like kicked him, maybe kicked him in the head while he was on the ground, maybe while he was cuffed.
Mhm.
But the AG said no. They looked at the body cam footage, and it's been a fight. It's been a fight to try and get that footage, and that's part of the problem. Is even if the cops were in the clear, the fact that they're fighting so hard against transparency makes you have to kind of believe that they're not. Because I mean, in Alabama, we have this basic rule where it's like if the cops are in the wrong, you'll never see the body cam footage, and if the cops are in the right, they release it immediately. It's like why,
Mhm.
how can you hide behind like body cam footage restrictions when every time it clears you, you release it? And so, you know,
Yeah.
we've had a front row seat to that. So yeah, I mean, here's Brandon Hicks, Officer of the Year, and then like a year later,
Mhm.
he's literally like maybe the villain in this beating of a black kid.
So it I'm, like, pretty happy that you brought up the example of this dude specifically because I feel like he kind of, is the perfect example of all of the issues with, like, how it is that we perceive and understand policing in this country, right? So, and, like, where how it all leads back to Copaganda and the statement that you got from this lady where she said they were just doing their job, um, and how these kinds of movies that we're gonna talk about, like, play into that, right? So, um, I think, for me, and I think a lot of other Black people will agree that, like, we too want to live lives that are free of, like, crime and violence. We don't want to have to deal with that on a daily basis within our communities and, like, in our day-to-day day-to-day lives. Um, But the answer to that concern is always just like, okay, well, let's just throw more police at the problem. And while I understand that, like, in an ideal world, the police are just there to protect and serve, like, that should be their job. I think when we see police officers, like, the idea should be like, okay, that person is a positive force in my community. The same way when I see a firefighter, I'm like, that person is helping my community be a better and safer place. When I see a cop, I don't think that. I think, what is that person up to? How are they going to try to abuse their power and inflict that power onto me? So, on the one hand, you have Brandon Hicks, who is doing good work and he's saving the life of this unconscious woman. On the flip side, you have him being part of what the institution as a whole is like known to do, which is be way too aggressive and violent towards black people, which, like, the history of policing in this country is full of examples of that. We would be like, anyone who tries to ignore that or dismiss that is just being silly. And so we're not going to talk too much about ACAB because I feel like that's like a totally different topic that deserves its own its own episode and its own space for conversation. But it's like kind of that idea where, okay, yeah, like, there are good cops there, but like, even if you're a good cop, you're working within a bad system that reinforces all of this bad behavior. So like, you can't even really stand out as a good version of a cop or as a good cop. And to tie it back to Copaganda, all of the this history of news reporting, and then from there we move into like TV shows and movies, which typically paint cops in a really, really, really positive light, which then is essentially manufacturing consent for bad police behavior that mostly involves being extremely violent and antagonistic towards black people. So we have sort of the background of like how it applies in news media, but then we have like a long history of propaganda in TV, which we don't want to talk about because we're more movie podcast than a TV podcast. But like police dramas, police procedurals, like, there's a very rich history of those in TV shows, like everything from like um, what is it, Adam 1-2 or Adam 12 to Dragnet through CSI and all of those offshoots, Hawaii 5-0, like, all you turn on the TV, you're like still on any given night, you're like most likely going to see a show that is a cop show that is centered around cops as our protagonists. In like the early history of these shows, a lot of times the LAPD would have either like PR people or someone else who were like consultants on the show who were helping to sculpt the image of the cops and how they were depicted. And again, a lot of times this meant like painting the cops as good guys who are fighting crime against these like scary uh, black criminals in LA. And obviously, we know that the LAPD probably has the worst history in terms of its relationship to black people and black populations. So it kind of starts with news media, and then we get some TV stuff or a lot of TV stuff, and then it trickles down to movies. But before we go on to movies, do you have any thoughts about how propaganda plays out in TV across across the decades?
Yeah, well, I think too that even goes down to past the fictional cop shows, to the show, Cops, or as they tried to reintroduce right there, more recently, like Live PD or whatever, all the different like deals where,
Hmm.
for the most part, it's a show where you're just watching low level stuff, and a lot of the police are acting fine. But especially with especially to me when they brought in Live PD, it was like they're bringing all the experts, and like most of the experts were like very cop friendly, and we're like, oh, here the cop had to do this, Um, so yeah, from a TV standpoint, and then I wanted to bring up, even though maybe it's getting slightly away from just propaganda, there's also a an element of that to, I think, the Andy Griffith Show for white audiences, um, where I think that uh, there's this concept of Mayberry where um, Andy Griffith is the sheriff and Barney Fife is the deputy, and they are just good old boys, just keeping the law straight. And look how nicely taken care of Mayberry is, and it's like this fantasy world that never really existed, but like there's a in white culture like today. There's a especially in the South, there's like a yearning for this idea of Mayberry, even though that's something that's never really true. So that's like one of the police heroes for white people would be in the South would be Andy Griffith, older white people.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about it from like a southern perspective, um, specifically for like TV, because I feel like most of the examples that I gave, or like most of the ones that we see, are typically LA, a few in New York, like all the Dick Wolf shows are in New York. But, with Andy Griffith, and Mayberry, like there are also examples in the South. And like, again, to sort of like zoom out and think about like the history of policing, I think like a lot of people know and understand that like the history of policing is like very tied to histories of anti-black racism in this country, and like specifically slavery, and like slave catchers, and like all of that stuff. And then like uh a lot of like local police units kind of stemming from that, and like the theories of how it is that they police communities stemming from that, which then brings us to 2025, where still we see that an outsized number of violence towards civilians from police officers is towards black people. I was looking at some numbers, and I found this one kind of interesting, that um, over the last 7 years, so from 2017 to 2024, the there were unarmed civilians who were shot and killed by police officers. Um, the largest percentage were white people, um, followed by black people. But then obviously when you do like a per capita look based on, total populations in the country, obviously like a larger percentage of black populations were being killed by police officers, which, you know, obviously I think tells us like that empirical data tells us a lot about the state of policing in this country. But the one thing that I found interesting was between 2017 and 2024, the total number of people shot went up every year, despite crime, at least in like the back half of that time period, going down. People were still getting shot. Over 1,000 people were getting shot and killed by cops in America every year, which is insane. And the reason that we don't see it being as insane as it is because Copaganda and the whole machine with Copaganda is really good at convincing us that these cops are just doing their job, and like that's kind of, the collateral damage needed for them to properly protect our communities, which again, for me, I don't think they're actually doing.
Well, it's interesting too because that's really sad because in 2020 with the George Floyd incident, there was a collective moment of change there at the time, and I didn't realize this, but when I was just looking a minute ago, even the cops TV show actually was canceled after George Floyd, um, just
Yeah,
like out of a sudden distaste for you know just generally showing that kind of thing, and maybe its effects. So, but sadly, that
that was my favorite form of like performative progress in 2020. Like that one specifically, removing the TV show Cops, because you know I, I'll be honest, like there have been moments in my life where I have found Cops to be a guilty pleasure TV show watch, but like understanding that it is one of the worst forms of propaganda that is like that allows cops to continue their bad behavior, because we see them as being heroes and stopping crime, but like really it's just like, oh, they're just like tackling, like poor people who had a domestic dispute because they're fucking poor and like their life sucks, and nobody like wakes up and wants to do crime. They're kind of forced into it. And we're not gonna, like, stop people from doing that if we're not changing the the systems that they live within, which is, again, a larger discussion that this show isn't necessarily, designed to answer. But, like, yeah, canceling that show, like, obviously, like, doesn't actually do shit, and then I saw a year ago that it was back on, it was on, like, Fox Nation, and it was like, "Cool, so everything in 2020, like, was really just it was just fucking nothing." Like, all of that shit was for nothing, you know? Um, w we can we could have another discussion about, everything, like, all of the activism and, like, faux activism after George Floyd's death, another time, because I clearly have thoughts about that. To to bring us back to, to Copaganda and to Copaganda movies specifically. So, we understand how it works in news media, we understand how it works in TV, but then it also operates in movies. We've seen a ton of movies about cops, again, centering cops as the protagonists in these stories, which inherently makes us sympathetic to them and what it is that they're doing. And again, continues the cycle of an institution that is either at worst it is inherently evil, and at best is not as perfect as it should be. And I think policing is one of those jobs, one of those places where, like, you kind of need to be perfect, you know a few bad apples, um in, like, I don't know, you get a couple things wrong as a weather person, that's fine. you know you strike out a couple times as an MLB player, that's fine. Cops should not really be afforded the opportunity to mess up, because when they mess up, it means that people die. Um, so that's kind of how I see the like job and institution as a whole. But then we have cop movies, long history of those as well. We want to look at movies that are specifically about black cops, because there's a really interesting thing happening where when black people are filling the roles of cops, it tells us some interesting things about the institution's relationship to black communities. Um, and the two movies that we want to look at specifically are Black Klansman and Training Day. So I think we should start with Black Klansman, because I think that's doing an interesting thing where it's kind of like flipping propaganda on its head. It is still a movie that has an overall positive view of policing, but it's also about policing being used for an actual just and righteous cause, which is trying to dismantle the KKK, which I think is something that we can generally all agree with is, like, a good thing to do. And it centers a black cop who is trying to dismantle the the KKK. Um, so I guess, Jacob, just for you, just like general thoughts about Black Klansman and what it's doing as a movie about a black cop, but also celebrating policing and, like, the possibilities of policing as a whole.
Yeah, so the reason that I brought this up, this is really my main contribution to this conversation was Black Klansman. I love Black Klansman. It's my favorite Spike Lee movie, although I haven't seen, or I should say, Spike Lee joint. Um, uh, Even though I have not finished Do the Right Thing, and Do the Right Thing is incredible from what I've seen in just the first half, which um, and so, but I love Black Klansman, and it was interesting to me both inside like the text of the movie and then outside of the movie. There's this criticism. So John David Washington. I didn't even think about the fact that we're talking about father and son here until just this moment.
Oh shit. Yeah.
um, John David Washington, obviously playing the cop that goes and that the first, I think the first black officer on this small little Colorado police force, who says, "Let's bust up the
Mhm.
Klan." And to the credit of the people around him, and this is based on a true story, so to the credit of the real police around him that allowed him, that did empower him to go and try and bust up the Klan. Which, of course, the humor conceit of the movie is that he is portraying His name is Ron Stallworth, and he's portraying himself as a white person to the Klan to go undercover, which then
Yeah.
requires him to, in the movie, team up with Adam Driver when he needs to make physical appearances, which is hilariously like over complex. The fact that it's not Adam Driver both on the phone and in person, but obviously that's what makes the movie great is that you have a black guy
Mhm.
most of the time being the one talking to the Klan. But he has a girlfriend in the movie that's like a Black Panther, I think, or she's Black Power activist, and she's
Mhm.
like really sharply
Black Panther
critical
curious.
of the police completely, and very upset when she finds out that he's part of the police. And I can't remember at the end of the movie now is if she actually breaks up with him because he's in the police force, or if she kind of begrudgingly goes along with it. But it's pretty serious. I mean, she's pretty adamant, like, I don't want to be with someone who's a police. And I think the film portrays it in a very because at the end of the day, when you get to the end of that movie, it's like the whole investigation has been wiped. Like the higher ups in the police department have like basically hidden everything. So the system abused it at the end of the day. But there are the
Mhm.
couple of good police officers within the corrupt system. Obviously, Ron Stallworth, the black officer, being one of them, but also Adam Driver, who um, wrestles with his own racial background, passes as white but has Jewish background, which is a point of conflict in the movie. And then Steve Buscemi, who's just cool. Um, but like there are these good officers, and they're bummed too, but they're not. You know, they're kind of like have to chalk it up to the powers that be, and they still get one over at the end. Like I mean, the movie, all that work is kind of for nothing in a sense, but they still get one over on David Duke with that last phone call when Ron Stallworth gets to reveal that he's been speaking with the black guy the whole time. So I don't know. I think the movie handled it very well, but both
Mhm.
obviously within the movie, Spike Lee understands that there are people that would be critical of a black man joining the system that has been so oppressive. And then I just looked it up again because I know there was backlash from some other people, like apparently Boots Riley, um,
Mhm.
arguing that the film softens the reality of police brutality by portraying a police officer as a hero, fighting systemic racism. But obviously, it's also based on a true story, so it's an interesting complex work in that sense. And so I think it really hits the nuance of reality, but not everyone agrees
Mhm.
that was. There's still questions about whether that was proper.
Yeah. I think that's what makes it such a good, interesting movie is that it does really grapple with those nuances and it is asking those questions both within the movie and, sort of like the context around around the movie. Like, is it inherently Copaganda-esque to make a movie about cops doing stuff? Or like how much within the movie do you have to question the cop's place in the world in order to like bring about this justice? Because again, he is doing something that we can all agree is a good thing. But then the question becomes, um, can anything that a cop does be good because a cab? Or if they're trying to take down the KKK, um, can we then celebrate cops? You know, it's like it, it's a much more complicated version of propaganda than like what we're used to seeing, which is just like, oh, these cops are going into like black and brown communities and arresting drug dealers and gangbangers and stuff, and like everyone gets to leave and go like, hooray for the cops, they took down those criminals, and like we never think about who the criminals typically are, and why we're celebrating the cops taking them down
Yeah,
or
and of course,
whatever.
Black Klansman flips that because obviously the criminals are a bunch of very intimidating but also very stupid white guys. Um,
Yeah.
who are just, I mean, like pathetic. And I mean, everyone's talking about Lockjaw right now, one battle after another. Sean
Mhm.
Penn, but like these guys in a way are even more like realistically pathetic and dumb, but also like intimidating. And they might be some of the better, like they're less caricature and a little bit more real. Um, I want to say I found out recently this may or may not really be that big of a deal because Stokely Carmichael slash Kwame Ture was arrested so many places.
Mhm.
But I recently found out that Prattville, where I live, is one of those places that Stokely Carmichael was arrested. Um,
Nice.
the
Hell
history
yeah. Yeah,
history
Stokely
of that.
Carmichael has a brief scene in BlacKkKlansman. Um,
That
while we're
is
doing
an important incident because of the he's with the girl. He is with the girlfriend
that's
of
where he
Ron's.
meets her, right?
He's with her when they're pulled over, and one of the cops is um, using excessive force against him. So it's not like the film doesn't show that, obviously.
Yeah. While we're doing Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture connections, my sister dated his son in college.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's a little closer
So,
connection than just living somewhere he got arrested.
uh, th- both both cool connections. Always fun when we can bring up Kwame Ture, very cool, great figure in like Black liberation movements. Um, but yeah, so any other thoughts on Black Klansman, or should we jump into John David Washington's dad's maybe most famous role?
Yeah, I no.
And everything.
Let's jump into it, and I'm interested to hear your take because I recently watched Training Day for the first time for this very purpose,
Yeah.
and so I'm interested to hear your approach.
So this is a movie that I have a hard time with because it's by a cool black director in Antoine Fuqua, starring Denzel, who is like one of the greatest actors, definitely of our generation, probably of all time. This was the first movie that he won, or the first role that he won Best Lead Actor for, and the movie is like kind of racist and also propaganda in like a doubly racist way. So obviously he plays the main character who is training Ethan Hawke on his first day on the job and like whatever like special force they're on or whatever. And obviously Denzel's character is like a corrupt cop. So the movie is like propaganda in that it's about cops and like they're the protagonists, but the black cop is corrupt and like also inflicting harm and damage and violence onto his own community. And the only way that he is able to be taken down as a monster is by the very righteous new white cop. So
Right,
it's like a double, it's not even like, oh, this black cop is like operating within the system and like inflicting pain on other black people. It's like he's he's doing that, but he is also a criminal, and the only way that we can be saved of this criminal is through the good white cop.
right.
So
Even
like I walked
though,
away from that movie and I was like, what the fuck is the message here?
yeah, message wise, it's more of a, it's like it's almost like more of just a hey, this is just a psychopath. Don't think too much about it as a message. Like Denzel Washington is just
Yeah.
complete like, and Denzel does such a good job acting it that you're kind of like it still ends up being kind of a fun movie in a way, but definitely like I mean, if the racial roles were reversed, obviously you couldn't
Hmm.
have literally role. It's not like Ethan Hawke could be the seasoned white cop that is abusing the system, and Denzel's the young rookie. You'd have to
He
have
could be.
you'd have to have different actors in the roles probably. I mean, maybe I mean just
Oh,
even
just
from the,
not Ethan Hawke.
yeah, not just switch
Like
Denzel.
you could have a white guy who is that corrupt cop.
Yeah, I mean that, and then that changes the movie in so many ways. I mean, obviously Denzel,
Hmm.
it's not like he does meet with other white cops that are corrupt, And there's other white cops that he's brought in that are also corrupt. It's not showing that Denzel is like an outlier, but he kind of also feels like an outlier. Like it's not like, oh, all of LAPD is cool with this. It's like a significant, like small portion that's operating this way because they're staging things for other cops to
Mhm.
find. It's not like all cops are just involved in it. They have to stage things before the other cops arrive. So you
Yeah.
know, it still feels like he's very much the leader of the corruption. And yeah, the message of that is wild because the way it's presented, even though there's these other white cops around, it almost feels like Denzel is the reason that it's corrupt, or like that he's like it almost feels like he corrupted everybody else. When in reality, there are some lines stuck in the movie that like he learned the corruption from them. Like people say, I
Yeah.
remember when you came in here, you were fresh faced, yada yada, and then now you're corrupt.
Mhm.
So it's just really kind of messy in that regard, honestly.
Yeah, it ends up being really messy and muddled, and it's a movie that I personally have, like, a really tough time watching and coming to grips with because I think that it is, like, inherently racist in the way that it ends with Ethan Hawke being the good guy, and the good guy being a white cop and taking down the corrupt black cop while also reinforcing stereotypes about crime in black communities. So it's sort of like a weird trifecta where instead of just being a movie about white cops uh, taking down crime in black communities, reinforcing bad stereotypes about black people, it also adds in the layer of the Denzel character. And then like also for all the great performances that Denzel's had, that's the one that he wins best actor for, like not for Malcolm X, not for any of the other great roles that he's had across the years. Nope, when he's a corrupt cop, uh, we're gonna give him the Oscar for his Copaganda flick. Like that also feels kind of icky looking
It
back on
does.
it.
I mean, and he's like, because he's the villain, he's the protagonist and the villain, which is like
Hmm.
you would think in this discussion, like it's villainizing a cop, which is good. But the
Yeah,
problem is, with the problem being that it's a black cop, that it makes it feel like, well, it's he's a villain. He's a villainous cop because he's black. You can't like that's not what it's
yeah.
saying, but you can't escape that vibe.
If the Ethan Hawke character were played by a black actor, it would maybe not feel as bad. But the fact that the villainous black cop is taken down by the good white cop,
Right,
that's where it becomes really tricky.
right. Um, you know, yeah, it is. It's even if you try and say, even if you try and pull out race and say this is just about two individual characters, it's not really about the fact that he's white. Ethan Hawke just
Mhm.
happens to be a real Boy Scout dude that actually cares, and Denzel Washington just happens to be a psychopath. You still can't escape the racial components of that, especially considering the other stuff going on with the black community and the way it's portrayed in the movie. So it's like it's just impossible to get away from. Even if you try to make it about just it's about these individual characters, because again, it portrays some white cops as bad, but it doesn't really
Mhm.
focus on those white cops as much as it focuses on the main black cop that's bad and the white cop that's good.
And then on top of that, when we think about who is portrayed as the criminals in this movie, it's exclusively Mexican and black people. Like
Yeah, right.
there are no white criminals in this movie,
Yeah, well, except for
the
what
cops,
no, no,
right?
well,
Or they're
except for what's his name? It's not Stephen Lang. The guy that they kill, the guy that they try and make Ethan Hawke kill, or
oh, I don't remember that scene. Okay,
uh,
so
that's like the pivotal one where Denzel goes to get the money out of the floor, and
mhm,
it's the white guy from the
okay,
beginning.
yeah.
He's technically a criminal, but again, it's not the vibe of the movie that you're left with, obviously.
Yeah. And then, I think you mentioned that it takes place in LA, and we mentioned a little bit before that LA specifically, the LAPD has like the worst history in terms of its relationship to black communities, which again, when we're thinking about Training Day and everything that makes it tricky as a Copaganda movie, I think that just adds another layer because it again reinforces stereotypes of how we view like specifically black communities in LA as like all being criminals and gangbangers and whatever. And then like, oh, here comes this black cop who, oh, all he's gonna do is take advantage of them and like be corrupt and just double down on black guys in LA all being fucking criminals.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it where Black Klansman, I think, is dealing with the nuances of a black cop in a really interesting and like emotionally honest kind of way. Despite arguments from Boots Riley and others, which like I totally understand why someone would approach the movie with that thought process. I think Training Day is a little more dishonest in how it's dealing with the nuances of what it means to be a black cop in again this institution and the system that is historically very very anti-black and super racist in its practices. Um, there are a few other movies that feature black cops that could be kind of interesting. A lot of like buddy cop movies. So we think about like Lethal Weapon with Danny Glover, obviously, like Beverly Hills Cop in 48 Hours with Eddie Murphy, and then you get into Rush Hour and Rush Hour 2, which introduces a whole host of new kinds of like racist tropes when it comes to um, cops and you know who the cops are, and then it kind of like leads into something like Bad Boys, where both cops are black but it's not really about them being black cops. It's just like two cops who happen to be black. So I don't know if you have anything on any of those buddy cop movies and what it means for one or two of the cops to be black.
I was looking at that a little bit before we started. I don't really have a whole lot because I've dawns on me that I haven't really seen that many buddy cop movies. The closest I've probably seen the buddy cop movie in that regard is Rush Hour, which is not really you know it's a black cop, and Jackie Chan is a I don't he's an Asian
It's
guy.
Chinese. Yeah.
Is he an
Yeah.
officer? But is he an officer? I don't know if he's an officer.
Yeah, I think he's a maybe I think he's a like Hong Kong detective. I think that's
Maybe,
what his character is.
or he might be. I think he's like a guard. I think he's like in the
Like a
Princess's
security guard.
Guard or something.
Yeah.
And then
Maybe
Shanghai Noon,
detective turned guard. Yeah.
which is also not at
Yeah.
all a buddy cop. It's because Owen Wilson's not even a cop. Uh,
Yeah.
so anyway, um, yeah, I think I mixed those two together. I think Jackie Chan is a cop in Rush Hour. Anyway, so yeah, I don't really have a lot, and I haven't seen the Bad Boys movies. Um, so I have some, but my, and then TV wise, there is the great black and white duo of Sean and Gus on Psych, which is like
Mm,
my favorite show. Which that's barely cops. um,
yeah.
so it's not really doesn't all quite fit the bill. But yeah, I think that's interesting that for a time it was like we had to pair up the white and a black guy. Um,
Mhm.
I'm sure there's just some two white buddy cop movies, and now we've got. But I think the problem would be like they for a while you couldn't. The studios felt like, well, we can't pair up two black guys as buddies, buddy cops.
Mhm.
Um, and now you have that too with not just Bad Boys, but if you count people of color, you have like Kevin Hart and The Rock have a kind of series like that in a way,
Yeah.
um, to a degree.
There's the
So
Kevin Hart Ice Cube movie where Ice Cube is a cop and Kevin Hart rides along. I think it's called Ride Along.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's correct.
But so
So
I think The interesting thing about, like, Lethal Weapon through Bad Boys is when you make one of the cops black, it kind of, like I I don't know that it's intentional, but the sort of, like, um the result of that is a sort of sanitizing of the racist history of policing and police institutions, where it's like, well, how can cops be racist towards black people if one of the cops is a black guy? Or in Bad Boys, if both of the cops are black guys, then like, how can it be racist towards black communities? Even though we have seen examples a lot of times, like in like Boys in the Hood, where there's like a specific scene with the black cop who is like way more antagonistic towards um the Cuba Gooding Jr. character and his friends than like any of the white cops are, because he has this internalized racism and like hatred for himself by being a cop that he then uh communicates out to, you know, the young black folks that he's policing. So like, you know, even with Lethal Weapon, Bad Boys, and all those Rush Hour, all those movies, it still doesn't like trick black people into thinking, "Oh, cops aren't that bad because even one of us could be a cop." Is that's at least my
True,
reading of it.
true. Yeah, I totally get that. I also wanted to jump back for a second to the Andy Griffith thing, um,
Mhm,
and specifically because so I guess what I'm trying to get at is so the first episode of Andy Griffith aired in 1960, and there's only ever one black actor in a speaking role in that series. Even though North Carolina had a lot of it's set in the fictional Mayberry, North Carolina, and that is like so my especially like my parents growing up, my grandparents were in a little bit more of a poverty situation, so they may have been closer to some kind of crime at some point. But for the longest time, like my family and a lot of families like mine aren't really like we don't see police through the lens of crime very much because we're just so disconnected from any criminal activity, even to the most part in our neighborhoods and things. We don't have a lot of bad contacts with police officers in real life, and then you mix that with this show, Andy Griffith, which is not about. I mean, it's not really about policing, but Andy Griffith is a sheriff and Barney Fife is the deputy, and you get this sensibility of like that's just a good these two good white cops who run this town, and that they're kind to everybody. They're never I mean they're not like racist or anything obviously, and like when they are, but there's not black people on the show really. But
mhm,
then that starts in 1960, but then at Bloody Sunday, just like 40 miles west of me, is happening in
mhm,
1965. And it's like I love my grandfather, who's 85 today, and I think he's a good
oh,
man
hell yeah, happy
overall.
birthday.
Not 85 like today, but he
Oh.
back in August. He turned 85 in August. But he,
Happy belated.
yeah, he's a really good man in so many ways, and he's definitely not the most racist 85-year-old man. Um, he does spend a little too much time on Fox News and such, but
Mhm,
he just has such a sensibility, and he came from poverty to a degree, so he's always like, "Look, I worked hard. You have to work hard. You do this, and you can do whatever." But I'm like, I'm looking back, and he's 25 when Bloody Sunday happened, and I'm like, the fact that that has so little resonation probably on his life, but like the
mhm,
images from Bloody Sunday for Black people, I can't imagine. I mean, that's a nationally televised event um, where cops were releasing dogs and turning hoses on Black people for just protesting peacefully for their rights. And we're not that far removed. We're not that far removed
no,
at all. In addition to the other ways that police brutality has continued since 1965 and onward, of course, obviously the things that we've talked about, Judas and the Black Messiah is not about it has Jesse Plemons as a cop, obviously, but the FBI, what they did with Fred Hampton,
Mhm.
the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. that so many people think was clandestine law enforcement. Um, you know, we ignore that history
Thanks, J.
when
Edgar Hoover,
yeah, and
racist
and so
bitch.
we only look at that like white people, Southern white people, especially just tend to look like we only look at law enforcement as like an honorable, like half the kids in kindergarten want to be a police officer, like they want to go serve their community, and there's like a noble side of that, but obviously also we have a real problem where policing is power, and a lot of people who desire that power aren't good people. And so we still face that problem. I did think of another movie, Raf, a movie
Mhm.
that doesn't that is the opposite of Copaganda. Does a really good job of flipping the script. One of the best movies of last year from a white director. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking Rebel Ridge?
Rebel Ridge, yeah. Um,
Yeah. That's a good ACAB movie, which I think we could have a interesting discussion about ACAB movies, which I think are sort of the flip side of Copaganda. Thinking
and I
about
think
Copaganda's movies that are like promoting the institution, where ACAB movies are kind of ones that are like highlighting how bad the institution has been.
and of course the way that they flip with the protagonist being a black man who
Mhm.
specifically refuses like to commit any violence. Um,
Yeah.
it's the coolest thing ever. The way he basically doesn't, especially won't shoot anybody, um, and being like this military guy, a cop in his own is in his own right in a way, as a
Mhm.
soldier, versus these corrupt small town cops. And to be fair, too, it does portray some cops that have a moral compass of some kind, whether they were
Mhm.
aware of the abuse going on in the office and um, allowed for it beforehand or not. They do at least draw some line somewhere. But yeah, it definitely takes the approach
Yeah.
of like corrupt cops, and then there's cops within there that are not as bad, or maybe arguably okay people, but it's very much
Yeah.
forward on the corruption.
The I kind of mentioned this before, but for me, I think like it's not enough to have a few good apples, because I think the system is inherently and historically one that's detrimental, especially to Black communities. And sort of like this is the last thing I'll say for this episode, but sort of like anecdotally, I I don't dislike individual cops. Like I have had friends, family friends who are Black, Hispanic, white, who are cops, or have family members who are cops, and like those people have always been like really nice to me, and I do understand that there is a desire for nobility and to serve one's community, which I think is like really rad and what I want the institution to be as a whole. But for me, when I see cops, anytime I've been in a car with friends and we get pulled over, I am shitting bricks, because I know, based on both the raw data and from uh, instances that have been covered in the news and talked about at length, I know that I am like a target for them. I don't see them as an institution that is there to help protect me. I see them as an institution that is going to cause harm to me, no matter what it is that I'm doing. I'm not a criminal. I'm just another person, and like many other Black people, when I see a cop, I get a little frightened, which is not what the intention should be. That's not what the reaction should be when we see cops. We should think, cool, that person is there to help me. I can go up to them and like ask them for directions or like help or anything like that. And that is oftentimes like not the feeling that I've had. There have been moments in my life where I've been genuinely concerned that a rogue cop was going to take my life. Like fully, I have fully been in moments like that, and I can tell you it's not a good feeling. I would not wish that on anyone, and I think the people who put on those uniforms need to understand that. And like, it's a tough job, but like, you got to be up for the fucking task because, again, that's not a job where there's a lot of room for error because the error is you taking someone's life, and that's not what you allegedly signed up for. So,
And I think that there's a lot of cops, a lot of cops who maybe in their own individual capacity are pretty good, but they have a problem where they hear about people being scared, black people being scared when they get pulled over by a cop, and they kind of downplay that. Like their idea of it is that like that's overwrought, and that like if everybody's calm, everything will be fine, and that and they kind of are patronizing in their approach instead of understanding the reality. This is a reality. It's not it's not a irrational fear. This is a real problem, and it's your job to try and change the system and to approach people rather than act like, look, if I pull you over, just, I mean, we had one of these in the wake of the Ulysses Wilkerson stuff. We had these forums with the
mhm.
cops. The cops were like, look, if we pull you over, just get your license out and get your lights on and just put your hands on your steering wheel and everybody will feel comfortable and all this. And it's like, there's no situation where a black person getting pulled over by you is going to feel comfortable because of there's a lot of history that you're just kind of glazing over here that
Yeah.
is you know real, and you should you need to if you don't start out with a place of respect for that and appreciation and understanding of that, then you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And then to bring it back to this, what do you think like we need to do or like the movie industry needs to do going forward in order to not continue to reinforce, you know, uh propaganda stereotypes that lead to that kind of disconnect between the community and police forces? Do we need more rebel ridges or is it something else
We
completely?
do need more rebel ridges. We need more, and we also just need more movies that show cops acting either corruptly or questionably at the very least. We need some
Mhm.
movies, especially when it comes to like street patrol stuff. We're never going to get away from, and like a lot of our favorite movies, are going to be detective stuff. And detective stuff doesn't really get into the same necessarily problems, probably because it's all like murder investigations, and for the most part, it's not really about
Yeah.
Like Seven. Both those characters are detectives. We didn't talk about that movie. Like
Mhm.
Zodiac includes several detectives. Um, you're going to run into this problem of like murder investigation stuff is always going to be interesting. Um, but that's different more than like more patrol officers where we really see these problems is like these beat officers. So that's why we keep talking about these shows and movies like, The Rookie or all the LAPD shows that are out there now. I think one of our homework assignments for this episode, Raf, is we really got to watch Detroit based on what it's about.
Yeah.
Because it is like John Boyega as one of the officers, and it's a riot during a celebration for African American veterans returning from Vietnam. And then and the Detroit Police Department stages a raid on the club, an unlicensed club, is what during their celebration. So like, and then apparently the police are shown like using excessive force and stuff. So I think that's probably a really good movie for this conversation. Unfortunately, neither of us have seen it, um,
Yeah.
but
Or
that's
ACAB. That'll be for our ACAB discussion. Yeah.
that will really go up the list.
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. Hope our listeners have enjoyed. We have what, one or two more episodes
Just
left this season?
one more this season. Yeah,
Just one more.
race swapping.
Very nice. Race swapping. So that'll be coming soon, and then we'll maybe before the end of the year do a 2025 in black and white to talk about some of the movies that came out this year that have been mentioned briefly or more extensively in some of these episodes, and just review sort of like, what was going on in race and cinema this year. But yeah, we'll be talking race swapping next, and that'll close out season one. We'll be back, same feed. Subscribe and like us everywhere on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that good stuff. Follow us on socials, and we'll catch you all next time. Peace out, everyone.